With the recent release of the Green New Deal, there has been heightened noise and criticisms of scientific research on climate change, further confusing the complex concept that is already difficult to understand. Since the field's inception, the cause of climate change has been controversial between some scientists. Some of the main criticisms climate change skeptics make is that humans are not the cause of climate change, and the data that is provided to predict future outcomes is filled with error, which essentially assumes all the research is moot. Well, based on real data from proxy records dating back 650,000 years ago and temperature recordings since the 1800s, this just isn't true. Between conservative think tanks, the media, the internet, and other political agendas, climate change remains a weird concept in a lot of Americans' heads. It is time to step up to the plate and clear the air, as this is our opportunity to advance impactful federal legislation in the U.S. that will address all facets of sustainability for the first time in history. So, let's shed some light, shall we? The most common skeptical argument against human-caused climate change is that changes in solar activity, rather than just GHG emissions, is playing the biggest role. So I guess the sun is getting bigger, warmer, closer to Earth? No, not quite. As we know, the sun's rays emit heat toward Earth, either reflecting off of or being absorbed by different surfaces, such as water or ice. Now, when you add CO2 to the equation, it takes our thin layer of atmosphere and thickens it, subsequently trapping heat and further warming the Earth. This is called the atmospheric greenhouse effect, which causes heat to stay trapped rather than allowing it to escape into space. So the more carbon dioxide humans generate through industry, transportation, agriculture, etc., the more CO2 will thicken our atmospheric layer and cause more heat to be trapped, thereby continuously increasing temperatures. Then there are those scientists that contribute climate change to natural cycles of the environment. Well, sure, there was a little ice age, a medieval warm period, and then there was today. Today, where temperature levels soar past the warm period, where ice melts and polar bears drown, where plastic consumes our waterways and beaches and marine life dies, where hurricanes, typhoons, and flooding ravage our communities, and people die. The heights of today do not compare to the past, and the biggest contributor goes to humans and industry. It is our human processes that are emitting the massive amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but it also goes to the landscape changes that are occurring and the massive amounts of urban development in fragile areas. There are so many ways in which we as a species can change our habits to lessen these detrimental forces on the environment. Another reason it couldn't be contributed only to natural cycles is due to what is known as chemical weathering, Earth's own thermostat that buffers against drastic shifts in temperature. If climate change could be contributed to natural cycles, this corrective mechanism would have the capacity to keep the climate stable. But due to anthropogenic activity that is enhancing GHG's presence in the atmosphere, the intense amount of CO2 evokes positive feedback mechanisms that are further increasing the temperature. We know that CO2 is increasing from human activity because we can look at the different types of isotopes, or different kinds of carbon in the atmosphere. Carbon has 3 signature isotopic fingerprints based on the number of neutrons an atom carries. Plants prefer to use the lighter isotope carbon, carbon-12, over the heavier carbon-13, so they contain a higher ratio of isotope 12 to 13 than the atmosphere does. When fossil fuels are burned, the percentage of carbon-13 in the atmosphere increases. And no, it's not due to volcanic activity, which only emits about 1% as much CO2 as humans. In 2009, Duke University physics professor Nicole Scafetta presented at a seminar at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in D.C. Scafetta claimed that a climatic stabilization or cooling until 2030 to 2040 is forecasted by the phenomenological model. A cooling is not going to occur. It will get cold in some places, and we'll still experience seasons. But in the 2000s, there were twice as many record highs as record lows, and each of the past 3 decades has been warmer than any other decade since we started measuring in 1850. And since the 1900s, actual temperatures around the world increased almost a full degree, and most of that has happened since the 1970s. And then there are those scientists who claim the scientific models and future scenarios of climate change are not reliable because the scientists behind them do not fully understand atmospheric science. For example, atmospheric sciences professor at the University of Missouri, Anthony R. Lupo, argued using this model from 1958 to 2003 that the correlation between temperature and CO2 does not hold a sound argument because the correlation is not as strong on shorter timescales as it is on large timescales. It's this sort of argument that is incredibly frustrating. Climate changes over long periods of time, not over months. So when scientists assess these models, looking at the short-term differences will not show significant results, especially because there are extenuating circumstances that aren't taken into account with every single model, so it can be easy for skeptics to nitpick. However, as you can see, the short-term correlation model still shows a positive correlation between the two. This is not the only method to prove that CO2 leads temperature increases either. Studying proxy records, such as ice cores, allows us to study gases trapped in the ice cores so we can understand what Earth's atmosphere was like in the past. From this, we know that 800,000 years ago, CO2 levels were at 190 parts per million, and today they're at more than 400 parts per million, causing the Earth to warm 10 times faster than at the end of an ice age. The fact of the matter is, climate change is real, and denial is not the plausible course of action. With the ever-increasing population, matters are bound to get worse without proper widespread change and legislative action. The potential for the Green New Deal to make significant change is an opportunity we haven't been fully confronted with before. While the pushback of the Conservative Party is bound to be strong, it is the time now, more than ever, to spread the reality of climate change.